Hi, it's Mr. Johnson. I'm trying out some new technology with you today, so hopefully it goes well. It's been a few weeks since I've seen you. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've gotten some rest, that you're staying safe, you've gotten some things done around the house, and I hope this remote learning is going well for you. Um, my goal today is to try out some new technology and hopefully give a little context to some of the things that we have been, I guess, the nature walk we just took, and a few things that we'll be doing in the week or weeks coming up ahead of us. So today, for lack of a better way of putting it, I'd like you to take some notes. I know it's kind of weird to do it this way, but we're going to try it. And I don't expect us to do it very often, but like I said, trying something out here and we'll see how it goes. So if you need to pause it right now, go ahead and pause, get something to write on or and with. You can do it on your Chromebook. That's fine with me. Obviously, I'm not going to see it. That's for your reference. It's not. You can always go back and through and rewatch this video if you need to, but having notes down in front of you is always helpful. So again, expect questions about this content. Expect me to refer to it, and for you to ultimately have to do something where you apply this knowledge to future events and activities. So I assume that you've paused it by now to go get whatever you need to get, and we'll get started. When I assigned you the homework of going outside and doing a nature walk, true to my word, I went out and did the same thing. And yesterday, Monday, it was a lot nicer than this morning, which is Tuesday. Tuesday was still ended up being a beautiful day, but Monday I saw way more life as far as animals. But over the last couple days of walking, I saw European starlings, and which is a type of bird. Saw another couple types of birds called a downy woodpecker and white-breasted nuthatches, and all sorts of fun stuff. I saw several different species of trees. I even saw my first couple, flies. So life is starting to see this reprieve or this, escape from winter. So it's fun to see. So what I wanted you to do, the goal of the activity was to try to look for a diversity of life in your neighborhood, if at all possible. So that leads us to the information for today. What I really wanted you to do, without giving it a name yet, is look for the biodiversity of an area. The biodiversity talks about the variety of life of an area. Now, there are three categories of biodiversity. The three types of biodiversity are genetic biodiversity, species biodiversity, and ecological biodiversity. Now, remember, if I'm going too quick, feel free to pause, write down the information, and resume when you need to. Now, I'm going to go in more in depth with all three of these here in just a minute, but let's keep moving. Genetic biodiversity has to do with the number of different types of genes in a species. Now, that sounds kind of weird to think about, but remember that genes are the things that control what we look like. And so if there are more variety of genes, in other words, if there are more differences in some genes between organisms of the same species, then we're going to get a variety of traits. Species biodiversity. Now, this is the kind of biodiversity that most people think of when they hear biodiversity. If you talk to an ecologist, typically when they refer to biodiversity, they're talking about the number of different organisms, different kinds of organisms, I should say, species in a particular area or in an ecosystem. And then last but not least, ecological or ecological. Now, this is the diversity of ecosystems. How many different kinds are there? What does the community look like? Are there several different kinds of communities? Are there a lot of different habitats, or is it just kind of one main kind of community and one main ecosystem and one main habitat? So let's get into this a little bit more. To think about genetic biodiversity, think about dogs. They all came from the same species. If we were to take those dogs and kind of mix them together, make them into one, adorable mutt, that's a really good way to think of species biodiversity. We would imagine that all of the dogs that we have out there, all of those dogs that you see on the screen are really dog breeds. In other words, humans have bred them to have a characteristic or a set of characteristics that might be desirable. So if we kind of reverse that, we can imagine that a wild dog would have all sorts of different varieties of these traits, all sorts of different combinations of these looks. So you can think about genetic biodiversity is really the number, or how much variety is there? Do we have just one color fur, or are there a bunch of different blends of colors of fur? Think about a turtle. If we knew turtles as well as you knew humans, we could tell one turtle apart from others. In fact, you've probably have seen, these wildlife shows where people, might be workers in a zoo, and they have a lot of different, organisms of the same species, and they can tell them apart from each other. Well, it's because there's diversity in those species, and they are able to identify and tell the difference between those different organisms of the same species because they are genetically diverse. Now, what genetic biodiversity does, is it lets a population recover. If there is only one color of fur of a rabbit, and it lives in an area where there's a drought for 5 years, well, that 5-year drought is going to kill all the rabbits if they can't blend into their new brown surroundings. But if there are a variety of colors of fur, where there are some that are darker, some that are lighter, some that are more brown, some that are more gray, well, if there's a drought, that brown background is going to favor the rabbits that have brown fur. And so some of them are going to make it through. Genetic biodiversity is helpful in adjusting to changes in ecosystems. Species biodiversity. This is the fun one to think about. And this is the one that I sent you on a journey to go find and go investigate in your neighborhood. Species biodiversity doesn't necessarily always look at the number of any one population. It usually looks at how many different types of species are there. Now, there's a slight difference. Sometimes we're interested in how many different species there are. Sometimes we're interested in, are there a lot of species, but it's mainly just one that's dominating the area. So we're kind of interested in that a little bit. But really, this helps species adjust to changes in the ecosystem itself. It helps the ecosystem adjust to disturbances. So, for example, let's say that there is a fire that takes out a lot of different trees. Well, if we have some trees that are resistant to that fire because they have thicker bark, well, then those species that need trees to survive still will have some trees to live off of, because there's going to be some left behind. Think about a food web or a food chain. All of these organisms feed on other organisms. Well, how many different organisms of a food web can we get rid of before that food web collapses? As it turned out, it kind of depends on the species that we're talking about, and we'll discuss that more later. Species biodiversity. This is going to be the one that we are going to be focusing on mainly over the rest of this kind of semester in some fashion or another. So let's talk about ecological biodiversity. This picture I took out in Glacier National Park. It's a beautiful overlook of a mountain lake, a high alpine lake, and you can see that there's a lot of different community, or I guess there's a lot of different ecosystems and habitats in the area. Remember, an ecosystem, by the way, is an area that includes life, non-living things, and it all works together and is stable. A habitat is smaller, just where an organism lives. But anyway, so for example, we have an aquatic ecosystem here. We have sort of this kind of patchy, foresty area. We have this high, kind of this tundra-ish area where there's not a lot of trees, but there's just short vegetation. And then we even have these rocky, mountainous, snowy areas. So let's think about what happens if we adjust or change one of those areas. This is a very large ecological biodiversity. It's high up in the mountains, but we have some kind of forested areas. We have a lot of different ecosystems. We have kind of this tundra. We all have all of those different ecosystems that I just mentioned earlier. Well, they all enrich each other. They all make each other better. So, for example, this high, snow field in this rocky terrain. Well, that ecosystem, that water will find its way down to this lake. And that lake then is its own ecosystem where it's an aquatic ecosystem. And well, you can imagine also the fact that there's this lake being fed by the snow means that anything that lives in these patchy forested areas can go down and drink water there if it's an animal of some sort. Also, so if we got rid of that lake, then those animals would be at a disadvantage. Let's think about also these trees compared to the tundra, what looks like a meadow almost. So can we have just one and not the other? Well, for some species, so like a caribou, reindeer, for example, will like to eat this kind of licheny, this mossy kind of stuff. But also, we need some cover. We need some protection from the elements and from predators. And so that's why it's really important to have these patchy trees also. And it blocks some of the harsh weather. An interesting fact, just to bring us back to winter ecology. Do you remember that snow, the snow crystals, when they fly across the landscape, they can do some damage. And if you look at this is kind of a flagging of a tree on the bottom of the screen there, where the right half has been pummeled by winds going kind of in a left direction, and anything that's been protected by the trunk of the tree has survived. Anything that's not protected has been taken away. So ecologic biodiversity. If we get rid of one of these ecosystems, the others will be significantly altered, and so will all of the living things that need to be in those different ecosystems. And here's just another picture from Glacier National Park because I think it's beautiful. But it also shows kind of that same concept. We have glaciers up here feeding down into a mountain lake that you can't see just over this horizon. And then we have these giant waterfalls, but they're so far away they look small, kind of cascading down into this lake. We have all sorts of different ecosystems in there as well. And we even have micro ecosystems. So what I'm trying to get at is, everything is connected, everything is related, and the biodiversity is really important. When you take away one part of or affect one part of an ecosystem, you drastically affect other parts. So here's just kind of a recap. Genetic biodiversity, again, is a number of different characteristics within one population. This lets that population change. This lets that population better change to meet the needs of a new environment. Species biodiversity. This is the number of different organisms in an area. This helps that area recover from a disturbance better. And ecological biodiversity helps the stability of the larger ecosystems because all ecosystems are connected. That's the end of this video. Please check Google Classroom for any further instructions that I've given there. Otherwise, hopefully this worked out well, and we may or may not do more of these. We'll see. Thanks for spending the last little bit of time with me, and I'll see you later.